Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 70, recording on Monday, March 24th. We've got a guest for you today. His name is Nick Korte. He works for Over the Cap, and he is probably, in the public sphere, the best person you could talk to regarding compensatory picks. Now, that is jargon. That goes very deep. It is very in the weeds. But I wanted to talk about it because it's late March, and what else do we got besides the draft? So, conversation with him coming up later in the show. I'll have some timestamps down below if you're watching on YouTube or on Apple, Spotify, where you can just go right to that conversation if you're interested. As always, this show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the local area. They've got branches all over Minneapolis and the Minnesota region. The people who run the thing, Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, they are huge Vikings fans who have a very big vested interest in the team. So you want a bank that has a great platform that also is run by people who care about the same subject that you do. Highly recommend you go checking out First Resource Bank. Their information is in the description of the show. Like always, early in the week, we're going to do a little mailbag Q&A type back and forth. Took some questions on social media, got a bunch of them, a lot of similar topics, not a ton of Aaron Rodgers, which is probably good for everybody. Looking forward to hopping right into these, which we're going to do right now. First question comes from a Twitter member whose name is C. with two T's, excuse me. Who is Alec's draft crush so far? So that's third person, me talking in it. Which is never comfortable, but I never really get to talk about the guys that I like. And I will say, I do watch a lot of film because I am curious when I read draft analysis evaluations, like how much does what I think jive with what I'm seeing publicly from what some of the people who get paid to do that job in terms of draft analysis. How much does what I think go together with what I read and what is said. So I do put in some work. I look at a lot of numbers as well to kind of verify or at least give me an idea as far as the eye test goes. So I'll give you three names. And a lot of this, again, is based off tape study and based off, there's some conversations with people that enter into my psyche, but I'd say just guys that I like and really that I'm watching on tape and that make me want to stand up out of my seat. Or like these are guys that I would want to have on my team from the way that I believe they could play. The first name doesn't apply a ton to the Vikings because I'm not sure if they're going to be in the market for this guy this early in the first round. But Omarion Hampton, the North Carolina running back, I'm not going to go so far as to say that I think he is a better prospect than Ashton Jeanty. I'd say I haven't watched as much Jeanty as I have watched Omarion Hampton, but when I have watched him, and it goes back to last year watching Drake May tape, preparing for the draft that was last year's quarterback draft. And the Vikings were obviously very interested in Drake May. Omarion Hampton just stands out. I mean, the guy is big. He can protect. He can catch. He's got good vision. He breaks tackles at a really high rate. So just I've said it before, but the type of guy where you watch on film and I'm like standing out of my seat because I just can't get enough of it. And you want to get more film because you just want to see what else he does. He is that guy for me. We'll see how early he goes. Like I've seen some mock drafts where he is projected in the top, 15 picks. Some have even pegged him top 10. I'd be surprised if it was that high, but I could understand it because I just think this guy is a workhorse back. I listen sometimes to Todd McShay's podcast with Steve Minch, and Minch like compares him to Joe Mixon, and I haven't. I'm not an elite Joe Mixon mind, but if you get a guy like that who can sustain the production that a Joe Mixon has had for as long as he's been in the NFL, that's pretty intriguing. The next name for me, and this one does apply a little bit more from a play style and what the Vikings could be interested in standpoint. Walter Nolan, the Ole Miss defensive tackle, his tape just does more for me than any of the other interior defenders in the draft, not named Mason Graham. I haven't watched a ton of Michigan's Mason Graham because I just don't expect him to be anywhere close to where the Vikings are picking at 24 or if they trade back even later than that. But Walter Nolan is just it's explosive, it's violent, it's not perfect. I'm not sure if he's the best processor in terms of like if there's misdirection handoffs and that type of stuff, but if you want a guy who can just win one-on-one pass rush reps on the interior and who has done it in the Southeastern Conference, like it's pretty easy for me to get excited about that guy. Now, again, I am talking tape specific here. There's the evaluation for these draft prospects, as you guys know, because you've probably followed it even longer than I have. I mean, it goes very deep. It is a guy's cognitive ability. It's his psychological makeup. It is, just the how much is he willing to put in the work? How much does he care about it? Is he like, there's all those questions that make up the team's evaluation that goes to a level deeper that I will never be able to fully get at. But just strictly from watching Walter Nolan on tape, I really like the guy. He really stands out to me. I've watched your Derek Harmons, your Kenneth Grants, your Darius Alexanders, your TJ Sanders, like a lot of these interior defensive line names that you see projected at the top of the draft. And Walter Nolan just does more for me there. Now, I might be geared to wanting a guy who can rush the passer more than can hold up against the run. But I do often watch these prospects with the attempt that I'm watching them with what the Vikings would covet in terms of skill set, in terms of, body type. Like I try to keep that stuff in mind because it's relevant to my evaluation and my analysis. And then the third guy at the top of the draft is Gray Zabel, the North Dakota State interior offensive lineman who can play guard, who's probably a center in the long term, but just has blown away every part of this process. And that also stands out to me. It's kind of like Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback from Toledo last year. Like he goes to the Senior Bowl. He had some hype to him, goes to the Senior Bowl, blew that away, went to the Combine, blew that away, and it just checked every box. And for me, that's kind of Gray Zabel. I mean, the guy plays at North Dakota State. For some reason, with those North Dakota State linemen, the Cody Mox, even the North Dakota State tight ends, or South Dakota State tight ends like Tucker Kraft. I just like those players. Feel like they've had to put in a lot of work to get to where they have gotten to. And so a guy like him who is versatile on the interior, and just has done what he's done throughout this draft process, I am a big fan of. So those are three kind of at the top. Now, if you asked me, like somewhere later on, a position or player that I really like, I would say like DJ Giddens, the running back from Kansas State, is such a fun watch for me. The guy is just so slithery as a running back in between ball carriers. And again, another McShay, but on their podcast, they kind of call him the human glitch. And that is, there are times where you're like, how does he get from one crease to the next? So he's definitely a name. And I also like Miami's running back, Damian Martinez. He's a guy that is much bigger, doesn't have the explosiveness, but just a bigger guy with vision who can fit in between holes. And then, Xavier Restrepo, the Miami receiver, he's not going to blow anybody away from a measurables perspective, but watching him in college, he was just always open. So those are some names that come to mind. It's fun to talk through that conversation, and I appreciate that question. Purple Nurple asks, what positions are lining up for a fun camp competition? I'm looking at CB, cornerback, left guard, and third safety. I'd say cornerback for sure. When you've got, obviously Byron Murphy Jr., we know where he's going to be, but Isaiah Rodgers, younger guy, interesting. Mekhi Blackmon coming off the torn ACL, younger guy, interesting. Dwight McGlothern, undrafted guy, young, interesting. Jeff Okudah, younger, physical, former first round. Just a lot of different, players picked in different spots, come from different backgrounds that are probably all going to be competing with one another and are all pretty young. Like that to me is going to be pretty fun. Left guard, certainly, whether it's Blake Brandel, whether they draft a player, whether Walter Rouse gets an opportunity, just how they utilize that room. And it ties together for me of what kind of run scheme are we looking at? Is it the same that we've seen over the last few years, which is kind of a hodgepodge of some outside zone, some mid zone, some inside zone, some pulling scheme, some gap scheme duo stuff? Is it different? How are there more pullers? Are there receiver inserts? Just how that group, the interior of the offensive line, left guard, who gets the opportunities there, and then the types of run schemes that are being practiced, like all that stuff in camp workouts, I'm going to be keep a very close eye on. And then interior of the defensive line, that's another one, just to see, your Levi Drake Rodriguez alongside Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen. I don't see that as some great camp competition, but I'm just looking forward to seeing that group kind of in action. You mentioned third safety. I mean, for me, yes, Theo Jackson, it'll be fun to watch him play, but the way I'm pegging it right now, it is Harrison Smith and Theo on the back end, and then you have Josh Metellus as your rover kind of all over the field the way he usually is. Next question comes from Mark, MN Sports Guy 0. Odds on the top quarterback 2 candidates based on what you've been hearing. Flacco and Tannehill have been tossed around by a lot of various people. Those 2 names are 2 that I'd mention. The other 3 names that I'll mention, one's a free agent, Drew Lock. The other 2 are potential trade options in Sam Howell, who plays with the Seahawks, and Aiden O'Connell with the Raiders. Those are probably the 5. I don't have a great feel right now of which would be the priority there. Joe Flacco, I kind of wondered if New York would be an option for him. They obviously end up signing Jameis Winston, so we'll see kind of what happens. But those 5 are kind of still within the conversations that makes sense to me. Next question comes from Deb. Do you think if the Titans draft Cam Ward, that Will Levis will be traded, and could the Vikings be interested with him as the backup to JJ? To your first question, Deb, do you think if the Titans draft Cam Ward that Will Levis will be traded? He could be. Definitely would be an option to be traded. Could the Vikings be interested in him as the backup to JJ? No. Next question comes from Scott, who has seen this, Alec, and it is a quote tweet of this. If you're on social media, you're on Twitter, you've probably seen it. It's this overlay of J.J. McCarthy's numbers in college in 2023 at Michigan compared to C.J. Stroud's in 2022 at Ohio State. And it is a very favorable chart to J.J. McCarthy, which is understandable. I mean, we have litigated the J.J. McCarthy college evaluation a lot in writing and over probably podcasts for a long time now. But I mean, with J.J. McCarthy, if he is healthy and on the field, I think the Vikings have full confidence in what he can do and what he can be in terms of his pocket mobility, his ability to keep his eyes up, his ability to anticipate, his arm strength over the middle of the field, his willingness to throw it over the middle of the field. We'll see about like deep ball accuracy and all that. I think that is a conversation that we will have. I think monitoring the torque on his arm was a conversation after the draft that will continue to be. The footwork and consistency with that against pressure, that's another conversation where you really have a hard time getting a feel for that in training camp. But again, I go back to the summary of where I started this answer. If he is on the field and healthy and as engaged as everyone knows he can be, of course, and asserts himself as the leader that he obviously became at Michigan, then I think that's where the Vikings wanted to get to. And I think if that is the case, you have a team that is so well built around him that he doesn't have to be the hero. And that's the idea when you draft a young quarterback. So I appreciate you tossing the chart my way. But yeah, I mean, I remember going through all the numbers, the 3rd and 7 long numbers on True Media with my advanced metrics of EPA, of attempts, of completion percentage. And I watched a lot of film myself. I mean, I remember going back and rewatching the early parts of that season. I think they played ECU and games like that. I mean, there was a lot of tape study throughout that time. And so, this spring, if it, assuming JJ's back on the field and doing what I think we started to see at the end of training, at the end, but before he got injured last training camp, I've been on the record many times of saying that I always thought Sam Darnold was going to start the season, but there is no question right before that joint practice in Cleveland, after the Raiders preseason game, the Vikings really wanted to give him more opportunity in Cleveland, and him being J.J. McCarthy, give him some more first-team reps and see how he would respond. Like, that was about to be a very important evaluation period for him, and obviously it did not happen because of the injury. Next question from DJ Walsh is, let's see here. Gotta find it. Who from the group of fringe practice squad players are you most excited to see in training camp this year? He gives a bunch of options, and really he gives Dwight McGlothern, Gabriel Murphy, Levi Drake Rodriguez. Those are three of them for sure. I mean, Levi Drake with another year in a professional environment. How does his body look? What does his physicality look like? I don't have questions about the motor. Can he hold up against the run? I mean, those are some questions, but I'm very intrigued by him. Dwight McGlothern, similarly, I think he has really good ball skills. I think he really wants it. And so alongside the Jeff Okudas and the Isaiah Rodgers, how does he look? Mekhi Blackmon, how does he look? And then, Gabriel Murphy's definitely interesting. Shorter arm length, but has some juice as a pass rusher and can drop and stuff like that. And then Walter Rouse, for me, I would also add. Just as a guy who was drafted as a tackle, bigger guy, very sharp guy, really awesome to talk to. Like, he's the type of guy, if you're out at training camp and he's like signing autographs for your child, or, even for you, if you're a younger person listening to this, you're like, man, that guy's impressive. Like, that is the type of guy Walter Rouse is. And I might as well throw Michael Juergens in there, because behind Ryan Kelly, I mean, center depth would be a question, especially because, Ryan Kelly has navigated the injuries that he's navigated. And so if that were to happen, and then you were to fall back to a Michael Juergens who's never played a snap in the NFL with the quarterback who's also never played a real regular season snap in the NFL, that's probably not the place that you would want to be at. Next question comes from Vikings Lead. How is Mekhi Blackmon's recovery coming? I asked someone about that, and I got the response, he's ready, brother. So there you go. Next question. I liked this one. I thought it was good. The Twitter handle here is @dshepek. Do you agree with this NFC North betting valuation? The Lions in this screenshot that he sent were plus 105 to win the division. The Packers were plus 250 to win the division. The Bears are plus 500 to win the division. And the Vikings are plus 550 to win the division. So do I agree with this NFC North betting valuation? So the first thing, I'll just talk Vikings specific. Why would the Vikings be plus 550 and have the worst odds to win the division? Well, I think the two obvious answers there are, A, quarterback is a question mark. Now, we could argue, even with a Jordan Love, obviously with Caleb Williams, of like how much certainty to those guys bring those teams. But there is more data on both of those players. So I think there is more reason to be certain, which is not to say anything against J.J. McCarthy other than it's like anything in life. The more sample size you have, the better you're probably going to be able to make a prediction. The other aspect with why the Vikings probably lie where they lie is just like, the Vikings are definitely banking on good health, just like they were last year. And it worked that way. And this is where you go back and forth. Did they have good health because of their practice habits and their structure of their practices and their training staff? Or did they just have good health because guys' ankles didn't get rolled up on? You could argue that until the cows come home. I don't really want to wade into those waters. But I will say, I mean, you're banking on health, obviously, a receiver. Justin Jefferson had the hamstring a couple seasons ago. Jordan Addison is obviously slight. He had the ankle early last season. Jalen Naylor has had injuries in the past. TJ Hawkinson is coming back from, he had a torn ACL a couple seasons ago. Josh Oliver's been banked up over time. Brian O'Neill got a concussion late in the season. He's been hurt at times, Achilles stuff. Right guard, Will Fries, broken tibia last year. Ryan Kelly, all sorts of injuries. Left tackle, Christian Darrisaw is going to be coming off a torn ACL. Aaron Jones, he's had as many injuries as he's had over his career and did last year, even though he played 17 games. Even Jordan Mason was hurt last year. And then at quarterback, if J.J. McCarthy ends up QB1 at the start of the season, he obviously had the torn meniscus. So there's injuries there. Defensively, Jonathan Grenard has had injuries. Blake Cashman, Andrew Van Ginkel, Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen. Not Byron Murphy Jr. last year, but in the past he has. So, and you could probably do that with every other roster in the division. So I'm not just saying that's the Vikings, but there's like the pieces in place on paper are exactly that. They are on paper pieces that make you very, very excited about what this roster can do. I just think that's another reason why the odds are where they are. I would say that I probably have more optimism in the Vikings not shockingly, more optimism in the Vikings infrastructure than the Bears, even though the Bears do have a new coaching staff. The Lions I expect to be pretty good, but they have coordinator turnover, so what's that going to mean for them? The Green Bay Packers, they do have continuity, and I think Jeff Hafley, their defensive coordinator, is very good. They'll probably enhance their roster through the draft and hit there because they usually do. And then you wonder what another year could mean of development for some of their receivers and stuff like that. But I'm not shocked with where those numbers are. And like, again, just like last year, if the Vikings can be as healthy as they were, and if Brian Flores and Kevin O'Connell can maximize the roster just like they did last year, then you're talking about a team that's going to be saying, just like they were last year, that nobody believed in them and that they believed internally what they had. But this roster is no question better than last year's on paper. Steven asks, what does Dennis Gates need to do to get Mizzou to the next level? If you don't know, I'm a Mizzou alum. Dennis Gates is the Mizzou basketball coach. They lost in the tournament to Drake. Were out-coached embarrassingly. 2 years ago, I think they lost to Princeton. Might have been 3 years ago, but I think it was 2 years ago. Dennis Gates seems like a really good guy, sharp guy. He's pretty steely, pretty low-key. I don't know if he has the juice to kind of, get guys over the hump. I'm not sure from an X's and O's standpoint if he's a wizard, but I'm also not an exceptional basketball X's and O's person. So I'm a little out of pocket there. And I got to admit, I don't know everything about everything, even though sometimes sports writers can act that way. Dustin Roberts, what is the likelihood that the Vikings are banking this large amount of cap space they have to roll over to next season? It looks like they're over the cap now for 2026. Great question, Dustin. I think it's pretty likely they could roll some cap over. Now, because they have cap space for 2025, they have options. If they need to bring a player in, if there's a trade that presents itself with a really good player with a high cap hit, that's an option. That it just maximum flexibility for the present and future. And because this roster has the potential to get over the hump, depending on how good the quarterback play is and depending on health, I think it makes sense to leave room for another addition if that happens. I'm not going to sit here today and predict that something is crazy big coming down the pipe because I have not heard anything to that degree. But you can roll over cap, and then the Vikings have young players like Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw that you feel okay restructuring their contract and pushing money into the future because you expect those guys with their youth and production to perform. It's not like the Saints where you're restructuring and moving money back on veteran players who are going to fall off a cliff. It's a different strategy, and the Vikings are mindful of that. Last question, then we'll get to the conversation with Nick Korte. Does the 33rd overall pick carry more value? No, that wasn't he asked that too, but here we go. Can you identify some teams that may be interested in moving up to 24 and what the projected deal would look like? I'll kind of stick to the former part of that question. I think the teams that I would mention right now that would be most likely to move up to 24 and the Vikings could trade back. Buffalo is picking at 30. Kansas City is picking at 31. Philadelphia is picking at 32. Cleveland's at 33, Giants at 34, Titans at 35, Raiders at 37, Pelicans, Saints at 40. I went to the Wolves-Pelicans game last week or so where Zion went off, so they're in my mind because that was a putrid loss. But those are the 8 teams: Buffalo, Kansas City, Philly, Cleveland, Giants, Titans, Vegas, NOLA. Why did I say these 8? Well, Buffalo, Kansas City, Philly, Cleveland, and New Orleans, those 5, they have all shown a willingness to trade around in the draft in recent years. So there's that. The other aspect of it, there are a couple others. Buffalo has 2 picks in the top 65 beyond 30. So they have 30, 56, 62. Kansas City has 31, 63, 66. Cleveland has 33 and 67. The Giants have 34 and 65. Vegas has 37, 68. And NOLA has 40 and 71. So there are avenues to move back and pick up another, I don't know if you call it a premium pick, but definitely a sensible option that gives you a fair amount of probability that you get a pretty good player at those spots. And then the other aspect is, so like with Cleveland, with the Giants, with the Titans, Vegas, and New Orleans, let's say those teams don't pick a quarterback at the very top, but then they want to pick a quarterback and they might creep into the back of the first round to try to do that. Why would they do that? Because you get the extra 50-year option by taking a player in the first round. So let's say Cleveland at number 2, just for example purposes, they take Abdul Carter. Okay. So then later on in the draft, they're like, you know what? Tyler Shuck is still available. Let's get up to 24. Let's take Louisville's Tyler Shuck and we can move back. And maybe the Vikings go from 24 to 33 and 67 or something like that. Or let's say the Giants at 3, they can't get Cam Ward. They can't get Shador. They decide they want to get back in for Jackson Dart or something like that. You could get 34 and 65. Or like there are paths, the same with New Orleans. They have Derek Carr. It's kind of the final year there. Kellen Moore wants his guy. Let's say he really likes Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart's still available. Tyler Shuck's still available. That's where you can start to have those conversations. So those 8 teams are teams that I would be kind of keeping an eye on. And again, that's not to say the Vikings are 100% guaranteed going to trade back 24, because I've been on the record of this. Like, they have to find a player who's going to hit at 24. The odds are probably stacked against you anyway, but there's no it's okay. We got 3 extra picks and we didn't hit it on any of them. No, like, this is a team and a front office that has to hit on picks at this point, because this is an older roster that needs some replenishing and some depth in the form of youth and rookie contracts. So, I appreciate the questions. That one was fun to talk through. All of them were. But yeah, without further ado, here is a conversation with Nick Korte, who knows more about the comp pick formula and everything than probably anyone. So I hope you guys enjoy this. It's very in the weeds, but it's March 24th. Why not do it? Thank you guys for being here. All right, Nick, welcome to the show, the Comp Pick Vikings show that I have been wanting to do for a while. Thanks for hopping on and taking some time on this Monday morning.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Let's just start very general, very basic. Where do the Vikings stand from a comp pick perspective? I know people have flooded your probably social media inbox regarding where the Vikings stand, but just how would you explain where the Vikings are in terms of comp picks, not obviously for the 2025 draft, but for 2026 after this free agency period?
Yeah, so in order to receive compensatory picks, a team needs to have seen more unrestricted free agents leave than sign, and that has happened with the Vikings. They've seen 5 depart: Sam Darnold, Cam Bynum, Daniel Jones, Cam Robinson, Patrick Jones. And of course, they've signed 3 of them: Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, and Isaiah Rodgers. So Cancellations then happen by approximate value between the APYs and playing time and postseason honors to calculate a certain round. And as it stands right now, pretty even cancellations between Bynum Fries at a 4th round, Robinson Kelly at a 5th, and Jones Rogers at a 6th. So what does that leave us? It leaves, of course, the highest pick of all the compensatory picks, a 3rd rounder for Sam Darnold going to Seattle. It's 2 in a row for the Vikings after Cousins went to Atlanta last season. And Daniel Jones also remains open for a compensatory pick. Now, the question of which round, however, is intriguing because the program that I built for OTC, doesn't know how many snaps these players are going to play, obviously, in the regular season. So we just have to take some sort of estimate. And the best estimate that I've been able to figure out is just to look at a snap count average over the past 4 seasons. It's not perfect, but nothing will ever be perfect. And, and Jones, of course, has been all over the place. He's had high variance with his snap counts. He was injured a season. He was benched last season, but then he played near 100% of the snaps in a couple others. So put it all together, and the program right now has his just estimates his contract is valued as right on the bubble of that 4th or 5th round.
Interesting.
And which side of the bubble that comes out to really is going to matter as to whether or not he wins that starting job in Indianapolis against Anthony Richardson. Right now, the program is estimating 60% of the snaps, which, it's probably feast or famine there, depending on if he starts. Of course, injuries, could play into that. But if he can keep above about that 60% snap count, probably a 4th rounder, if not a 5th. Still a lot to, see as the season goes on, because this is compared against, thousands of other players in the NFL, and they're all going to have their own variables. But in any count, the Vikings should be, they should be hoping that Jones wins that starting job and keeps it in Indianapolis to, improve the comp pick that they could get for Jones. And that's also assuming that pick stays open. The Vikings may still want to sign another compensatory free agent out there. They may, not be worried about that pick for Daniel Jones, kind of similar to how it was with Danielle Hunter leaving last season. They still signed Jonathan Grenard. So that's front office's choice and what they want to do. I'm just trying to lay out the facts as I can best interpret them.
Yeah, so just listening to you, it sounds like the 3rd round comp pick for 2026 should be expected based upon Sam Darnold's value in signing for Seattle. And then obviously it becomes a question of how much does Daniel Jones play in Indianapolis, and what is his role? And if the Vikings don't add another compensatory signing, then that will dictate whether they get a 4th or 5th round pick forthcoming. Is that correct to summarize it in a sense? I don't know if I'm on it, but that's what is that correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Perfect. That's awesome. I'm curious because you've waded into these. This dynamic, this conversation for a long time. We can get into that at some point, but how rare is it for a team to generate 2 compensatory picks in a cycle, potentially as high as a 3rd or 4th or 3rd or 5th round pick? Like, how rare is that? Is that rare? Just from your experience, kind of assessing these things, what would you say about that potential return?
Yeah, I would say it's rare. It's certainly heard of, though. I think last season, just for a quick example off the top of my head, the Dolphins were in line for 2 third-round picks that year. Unfortunately for them, Christian Wilkins got hurt when He went to the Raiders, and so that got demoted to a fourth. But still, third and fourth is pretty high. I think that's pretty common. And looking at other teams, I think the Eagles are at a 3, 4, 5, 6. They haven't signed anyone. They let Milton Williams and other players go. So yeah, it happens. I think the Vikings are probably aware of where they stand and are planning their best to find a good balance between maximizing their draft returns versus just improving their roster. They had a lot of snaps go to free agency, so they had to be aggressive to replace those, and they did. And that included making some signings from free agents that were cut, such as Jonathan Allen, for example, which doesn't count against their compensatory standings. So that's always a aspect to be aware of as well. And I think the Vikings have done a really good job this free agency cycle to put their team in the best shape that they can for both the present and the future.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went there, because that's exactly kind of how I wanted to take it. I mean, I remember being in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine talking about their plan and their vision and conversations that came up with many people who have a very large say within the organization. They talked about, we want to obviously improve and enhance this roster for 2025, but we don't want that to handicap us for the potential darts that we could have in 2026. So they have been, to your point, very mindful of that cut market. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. There are other guys probably to trade for Jordan Mason as opposed to make another signing in that kind of category. They have been very mindful of it. And I wanted to ask you, I imagine it's pretty easy for you to delineate among the 30, the 32 teams. It's pretty easy for you to delineate which front offices kind of have this in mind as they are operating and which don't. And maybe they all do. But I would imagine for you, kind of looking at it as deeply as you do, that it's pretty that you can ascertain how many of the front office are aware of it versus not.
Yeah, I obviously can't speak to all 32 teams, but I think the awareness is a lot broader and more of a consensus than it was when I first started this. Back then, this is probably about 10 years ago or so. I mean, there were a few teams that were renowned for this. I think the Baltimore Ravens stand above all, and that had been pretty public knowledge there. But I think more and more teams, and I would hope that, trying to visualize this as I did, because it's pretty wonky logic to try to figure all this out without some visualizations. So I think I hope I've been helpful in that regard. I feel like some teams have just seen the work that we've done at OTC to help them out. Other teams, probably like the Ravens, have their own system to figure out what to do. I can't speak on what the Vikings do, but they do seem aware of the system. And some teams just like to prioritize veteran free agents, and that's fine. Other teams can see that if you don't have a lot of high profile free agents that are going to be leaving because you extended them or they're just not there, that could also be a good season to be aggressive in free agency, knowing, okay, well, if I don't really have comp picks to lose, then let's just go big right now, get our free agency out of the way, and then work on the draft picks another year.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The only other Vikings kind of specific question that I would have, and this is, as I told you before we recorded, an area where you could correct me probably completely, but in your visuals that you have posted on social media, kind of towards the bottom, you'll see Johnny Munt, Nick Mullins, maybe Trent Sherfield is kind of in that category of guys who have signed for under that $4 million-ish threshold. And I guess a question that I would have for you is, what is the reality? Is there a possibility that any of those players with their signings could become um, eligible for the Vikings to receive compensatory picks based upon them. Is that a path?
Yeah, for any player you see, on those charts that is not qualified as a compensatory free agent, I would say for most of them it's unlikely but not impossible. If it was impossible, they wouldn't be on there. So,
Yeah.
some of these players will have incentives that we don't know about yet. Incentives now that are earned now do count in the compensatory formula. That was a change in the 2020 CBA. So, and we try our best at OTC to get as many of those incentives as we can, but every single detail might not come to us immediately. So there's usually some cleanup and trying to figure out who got who had what and who earned what. So never count out incentives in that regard. And snap counts also play a factor, of course. Only on offense or defense. So if you look at a special teamer, like I think Trent Sherfield's a great example here.
Yeah.
He's been known for his special teams. The Broncos signed him for that purpose, and that's likely, if all goes well at wide receiver, that's likely where he's going to stay. Now, if the Broncos get a lot of injuries at wide receiver, Sherfield going to need to, play more offensive snaps. That's something that is, not predictable at all. But those are the factors that I'd say, for those possible compensatory free agents that are unlikely to qualify, but, can't rule them out yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, your point about Trent Sherfield, I know the Vikings wanted to bring him back for his work that he did as a gunner, and ultimately the Broncos went to a certain level. Where did your fascination or entry into being curious about this subject begin?
Well, I had just been reading really online message boards back in the 2000s around there, and there was a fellow who went by the name Adam JT13, and he'd just go around message boards, laying out the rules of the compensatory pick system as he best understood them, and gave his projections as the best that he could. I think he stopped doing that around the 2011 CBA, and a couple years later I got involved with OTC, and once I realized, we had all the contract data that we needed to, work the formula, I built my own model to try to estimate it. And I think the extra twist that I put on this is having the ability to update this in real time as free agent signing estimates come in, and trying to give, some perspective on, how fluid this all is, how things can change when players sign whenever, and to hopefully, at that critical time in free agency, to kind of lay out where teams stand to see, okay, can we afford to sign this player at this much without jeopardizing this pick? So that was kind of the insight I had back there, and it's people seem to enjoy it, so I've just kept rolling with it.
How long does it take to make a formula? A model for something like this, not a formula. A model for this type of, how long does that take? I'm sure now you can update it more seamlessly than you were able to probably back then, but I wonder.
Oh yeah, for any new project, it takes a lot of code to, establish it. Then beyond there, it's just, consistent tweaking as you learn new rules or have to recalibrate for where the cutoffs are, and all that. It always seems like the NFL Management Council is some sort of curveball to throw at me, even if they made a mistake and I just have to correct the correction after the fact.
Where do you feel like teams err the most? Like or is there a spot where as teams, as you've just monitored this for as long as you have, like where is there a place where you feel like, man, had they been more mindful of this? Or maybe just listening to you throughout this podcast, maybe it's just as simple as injuries affect, playing time, and that dictates the potential compensatory, what you would receive in a way that you just couldn't have foreseen on the front end if you're a team.
Yeah, I don't want to try to read the minds of all 32 NFL front offices. They probably have many intentions as to why they sign or let players leave. So it's comp picks aren't everything. So I can't speculate as to when I see a cancellation that I personally would not have done as a GM, but I may not have a head coach saying to me, we need to get this guy. He's going to be worth the value here, and it's a team effort. You have to listen to a bunch of voices and figure out what's in the best interest for the team as a whole, and not it's just one tool and among many in the toolbox.
Plus, you were talking about this with the Vikings specifically, which I thought was really prescient. It was like you're balancing the short term and long every year as you're navigating both free agency and then the comp picks as a possibility. And I think that's where, I don't know, for me, and even having you on, that's where the fascination for me comes from. And it's the same as the draft. It's you have people with incentives in the short term to win in the short term, to have the best season in the short term. Their jobs rely on sometimes the short term, whereas this can be a more future long-term tool. And that's where you mentioned like the Ravens and the Eagles this year. And the Eagles obviously a short sample on one cycle, but it's like some of these teams that have been successful are so good at balancing both of those sides in terms of what you do in the present and the future. So it's cool to when you said that, I thought that was very just interesting, because listening to you and just thinking about it, I feel like it is a way, if you are very mindful, to kind of hit both time horizons in some capacity.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think every coaching staff and front office is going to be under different time schedules as the owner might demand. We can probably think of a few teams out there who are definitely feel like they're under pressure to win now or they're going to be fired. Having that sense that you're going to be able to build a long-term sustainable plan, I think really helps there. I think the Vikings are definitely one of those teams. I think O'Connell, is clearly one of the better head coaches in the league. I think Wesley's doing an excellent job, in the front office running that team. So, that's the place you want to be. Sometimes, whatever the demands of ownership are doesn't let you be there. But, I think if you have that long-term security, thinking about, something long-term like comp picks does, become a lot more viable.
I'll end you here with this, and you may not have an answer, so it might be a dud of a question, but is there a compensatory pick? I don't know if it's a moment or a specific one that fascinated you the most or was most interesting to you.
That's a good question. I'm sure there's many. I just have to now I just have to think of one, to pick one out. I mean, I don't know if it was last year. It was the season before. I had noticed that several of the higher third round picks were way off from my projection, and I know one of them I caught an error that the NFL Management Council did in that upgraded a Cincinnati Bengals pick from a 6th to a 3rd, and I think Bengals fans just went crazy thanking me for that. But then the other part of that is I still thought the 49ers and Bills should have gotten a 3rd rounder, and they didn't. And apparently it took some sleuthing from both us and other NFL teams to figure out, what happened here. And it just turned out that they were valuing contracts a slightly different way if they were restructured, which I don't think made any sense. And I think the 49ers and Bills thought the same way, but that's what the rule ended up being. So just tweak the program and go from there.
Do you ever hear from teams?
A couple here and there. I hope that most of what I have built in the views here is hopefully self-explanatory enough that, there's not a lot of consulting that needs to be done. But, if any team ever wanted to come to me and say, give me your estimate on, how much we can sign this player to given these estimated snap counts and what value that would be. I can never give a definite answer to that, but I feel like I could give a good estimate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate the time, Nick. Thanks for hopping on. I know you know this. It's like I get questions all the time of what happens if people are like trying to play Tetris with it in some capacity. And so for me, I was like, we're here in late March. Got time now post free agency, so thought there was probably nobody more in tune to the subject to have to. So I appreciate you hopping on. Thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, great to be on. Thank you.
And that'll do it for episode 70 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate you guys listening. As always, I hope you enjoyed the very in-depth conversation with Nick, who, as I said at the top, knows more about the comp pick formula as probably anyone, and I appreciate his interest in it, so it was fun to have him on. If you're new here and you're watching on YouTube and you made it this far, please hit that subscribe button right down below. Helps us out. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, you can follow and get future episodes, and that we would be grateful for that as well. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. That is a member FDIC bank in the local Minneapolis area, so go check them out either at a local branch or in the description below. Stay tuned. Probably do one more episode later this week, and then I am off to Florida, to West Palm Beach for the owners meeting. So I'll probably have podcasts early next week. We'll have conversation for sure with Kevin O'Connell on Tuesday. And then we'll see what else we can get from down there. But stay locked in. The Alec Lewis Show. Have a great week. And thank you guys for listening.